Welcome to the Gothic Lore Series, in which we will dive into the world and history of our favorite game. Since Gothic underwent several retcons, retroactive changes in the continuity of the story, we will also speculate a bit about certain topics. The first place we talk about is where eventually every single one of us ended up after being thrown into the open-air prison. The old camp. The old camp was located at the southern end of the island Corinus, which is known as the Valley of Mines. Its castle, towering over the central plains, was the colossal guardian of the valley, a landmark that could be seen from every corner of the vale. The center of the camp was made up of a mighty fortress built from solid black blocks of stone. In stark contrast was the red roofing, heralding the harsh reign of the Ore Barons from afar. The castle was surrounded by a makeshift wooden palisade which contained the outer ring. The fortress itself consisted of the main house where the Ore Barons resided, the shooting range where the guards trained, the main gate, the guards' dormitories connected to the storage house, the Temple of Fire, and one remaining massive watchtower overlooking mountains and ocean alike. The fortress also had an extensive underground dungeon, which was rarely used since the long-gone occupation of the royal forces. The outer ring, mostly comprised of simple wooden shacks, also housed an arena. It was here where the diggers placed their bats on gladiators, fighting for their respective camp's glory. The ruins of the fallen watchtower nearby served as a dwelling for shadows and was also used as the southern gate of the outer ring. Right next to the gate was a large area covered by a roof. It was there where the traders of the camp gathered to show off their wares. Outside of the palisade, a ditch was dug, adding another defensive layer to the already mighty stronghold. While the castle itself was way older, the history of the old camp began with the creation of the magic barrier and the subsequent downfall of the royal troops. As the magic dome unexpectedly expanded, soon covering the whole valley, the prisoners used the element of surprise to overcome their jailers, immediately shifting the power relationship within the colony. King Roba II, still in need of the magic mineral, negotiated with the convicts and struck a deal. Outside goods, albeit food, alcohol, or even women, in exchange for the precious ore. Soon, a new power structure formed under the lead of a fearsome convict named Gomez. He appointed a handful of his most trusted men to the highest ranks of his leadership. Since then, the self-proclaimed Ore Barons ruled with an iron fist over the penal colony. With the collapse of the old mine, 10 years after the creation of the barrier, the power structure began to shift again. Gomez, losing his only source for the magical ore, commanded an attack on the free mine of the new camp and killed all fire mages, being the voices of reason who wanted to prevent an open war. After sealing off the gates of the camp, the nameless hero presumably teleported into the fortress, killing most of the Ore Barons and their minions. The deal the convict struck with the king's man made the old camp the richest and most powerful one in the power triangle inside the colony. The one and only source for their power was the magic ore. Occupying several mines over the decade the barrier existed, and a steady influx of fresh prisoners secured the might of the oldest faction. The earlier and smaller mines were near the mountain pass to Corinus. The abandoned mine, sitting on a mountain plateau, was the most elaborate one back in the old days of digging. It was not as deep as the old mine, but contained several steep chasms and large cavernous systems connected through an underground lake. Old mining equipment and smelters remained in the complete darkness long after its sudden collapse. Across the ravine at the pass were another two adits close beside each other. After those digs went cold, they concentrated on their biggest excavation, the old mine. Over the years, the diggers hacked strongly into the solid stone, creating the biggest mine shaft inside the whole valley. Several large shafts were long deserted even before the nameless hero descended into the nest. Although those cavernous systems were infested by the insectoid mine crawlers, a strong garrison of shadows and gods protected the diggers, at least most of the time. The lowest class of the old camp consisted mainly of diggers, with a few exceptions like Huno and Snaf being the smith and the cook. All the new arrivals in the colony were branded as diggers, and after their standing godfather, most of them eventually ended up in the old camp. Every digger was paid a minimal amount of ore and had to live in the outer ring of the camp. Dressed mostly in rags, they also wore a work attire completed with safety boots. While the majority of them was forced to work underground, finding their demise in the narrow shafts, some of them eventually climbed up the career ladder and became shadows. The shadows kept things going in the old camp, and their purpose was very versatile. They had a wide range of occupations like traders, spies, hunters, messengers, sentinels, and were generally used as a supportive role inside the camp society. Diego, for example, was the camp's recruiter, securing new diggers for the mine and also helping those who wanted to ascend to higher ranks. To become a shadow, one needed to be of use for the camp and gain the trust of the other shadows by working for them. Shadows were also not allowed to live inside the castle, thus living amongst the diggers in the outer ring. Though they were not the main line of defense, every shadow was trained in the art of combat. Their weapons of choice were the bow and one-handed melee weapons, mostly using swords. Their armor, and to some extent the guards' armor as well, were very similar to the uniforms of the Corinna's militia. The leathery battle collar, reinforced with different materials, is very characteristic and can be seen on most members of the camp. While their chest was covered in armor, the shadows usually only wore textile trousers and leather boots. The initial intent was to make their armors black and dark blue, hence the name Shadows, but it was later decided to dress them in the camp's typical red color scheme for a common identity. The Guard was the military complex of the old camp. Heavily armored and equipped with deadly weapons like two but mostly one-handed blades and heavy crossbows, they formed the front lines in any skirmish they participated in. Only well-trained shadows were given the chance to rise to the guard and to defend the fortress and mines. They were also garrisoned among the fire mages and ore barons inside the castle walls. While the early ranks were dressed in armors heavily inspired by the Corinna's militia, similar to the shadows but with additional battle skirts, the heavy guard armor displayed a demon-like face of solid metal as a chest piece and layered steel plates as additional protection for the legs. This bulky armor was also reinforced with chainmail for maximum defense against any attack. The second highest rank in the camp was held by the Mages of Fire. Their position was feared for many reasons, and even the Ore Barons paid their respect to some extent. As priests of Innos, the god of humans, flame and justice, their reputation was undeniably good, even among the convicts. If not for their reputation, it was the fear that kept the convicts from harming them. After all, they could conjure blazing flames and rains of fire. The Circle of Fire didn't care much about their demise, trapped within the very prison they once created. Since then, they lived a relatively good life inside the thick walls, devoted to their studies of the flame and serving their fiery god. The mages wore traditional red-colored robes and a black tippet or stole covering the shoulders and their loin. For their master Choristo wore a robe of grey colors with a red tippet and golden ornaments. At the top of the ranks were the Ore Barons. Their leader, a mysterious and fearsome figure called Gomez, was the mightiest man in the colony. He who controlled the ore controlled the entire valley. He appointed his most loyal man into the ranks of Ore Barons, now serving as the administration of the ore trade and as his own bodyguards. At the time of the nameless hero entering the barrier, 5 Ore Barons existed. Gomez, the leader himself, Raven, his right hand, Arto and Scar, his bodyguards, and Bartholo, the quartermaster. Stories tell of another Ore Baron who hunted orcs and was slain and resurrected in undeath to watch over the Stonehenge in the southern mountains. The Baron's garments were mostly made of black and red leather, completed with a battle skirt over their pants, heavy boots, and their shoulders covered with an animal's pelt, most likely that of a wolf. Gomez's personal armor on the other side, reinforced with steel, had an additional metal chest piece with ornaments depicting a scene of people under a tree. The day the barrier fell, chaos broke out. After most of the Ore Barons got slain by the Nameless One, the old camp was leaderless. Many of the convicts fled the scene immediately, like the group of Thoros, who led many diggers and former guards into the northern mountains of Khorinis, setting up camp in a temple in Yarkandar, behind the wide mountain ranges in the north. The rest who stayed behind either got captured by the arriving paladins or got killed by the dragon attack that burned down the whole outer ring. The first bit of speculation is about the old camp castle. It was never stated what the original purpose of the castle was and whom it belonged to, although we find just a little information in the deed that Lester seeks in the mountain fortress. Within this document it is stated that a noble count called Bergma of Westfeld sold the land of the valley and all its mines to the Church of Innos for 400 pounds of gold, and a certain magistrate of Timoris confirmed this testimony. So it was Bergma of Westfeld who lived in the mountain fortress, but whom did the castle in the middle of the valley belong to? Here are some theories of why and who created it. The first theory is that it was built by Bergma of Westfeld, who used it as another residence. The second one is that it was built due to the initial ore rush on the island by the royal troops as a storage and housing opportunity for the mining operations. The third theory is that the castle was built a long time ago, maybe even in the times of Roba I, as an outpost on the border of the realm. The king presumably wanted to have a presence on Khorinis, but the island was mostly rotted by mountains except one place that was literally made for such an outpost: the Valley of Mines. Towering over the central plains, the castle would overlook the whole region, including both mountain passes, the main one and the Troll Ravine in the northwest. Personally, I tend to the third theory, since having peripheral defenses in your kingdom is vital for fighting intruders and reconnaissance. This theory is also strengthened by the fact that Redford tells the hero that the Valley of Mines is full of ruins dating back to the First Orc Wars. So that's it with the first entry of the Gothic Lore Series. If you have any other theories, please let me know in the comments. My name is Vertigo, and I hope you learned something about Team Red, and remember, for Gomez!